Almost 1 year ago to the day, a new discovery was made that went mostly under the radar of most people. Would have gone under my radar too, except for I read an article about it in a magazine. The discovery that happened took place when a group of 13 people comprised of students and a professor at the University of California discovered a brand new color. A new color. I didn't know that you could discover a new color, and I have been, like you, standing baffled at Sherwin-Williams with the multitude of colors that are already available, and even more impressed that somebody has given each one a name. But that there would be a new color that would come about, and how does one discover a new color, I wondered. Well, it happened like this. So it was a group of students, and like I said, and faculty that came together, and they were working in a laboratory for the longest time. They had been working on this actually for years. And it's my understanding, and again, I'm speaking about things that are not my realm of expertise, to be sure. But they were looking at the eye, and they were doing mapping of the retina of the human eye. And you may remember this in biology class, unless you are an optometrist or an ophthalmologist, but then you're very familiar with this. But our eyes have cones in them, and these cones apparently can be manipulated in a certain way where if you put your chin, like when you go to get your eyes checked and you put your chin in the little chin holster, and then your eyes look through the special goggles, and they can map your retina, and they can isolate certain cones and set those aside, and they can stimulate other cones where your photoreceptors are enhanced, and by doing so, it opens up, apparently, a new way of seeing where there's a possibility of seeing different colors. And so some of these individuals were, about a year ago, looking in their laboratory. They had their retinas mapped, and they were looking into this machine, and they saw a color that they had never seen before. And it was brilliant, and it was gorgeous. And the way that it has been described is a ultra-saturated, incredibly brilliant color of teal. I've Googled what this color supposedly looks like, but it doesn't do it justice because I have not had my retinas mapped. I think that that's an okay thing. But I have not seen this color, and neither have you, and apparently it is spellbindingly beautiful. Been described, in fact, as the most beautiful thing. Now, one of the students who was an author of this paper and a part of this study, his name is James Fong, and James interviewed for this article. He said that this color is his most favorite color of all. It is so beautiful, and he had the honor of naming this color, which he named Olo, which is probably not the name I would have chosen for a brand new color. However, it makes sense where apparently when you map the cones in your eye, it's done with ones and zeros, and so this is 0, 1, 0, or if you write that out and it looks like letters, it's O-L-O, 0, 1, 0. So Olo. The interesting thing about Fong in this article was that while it is his favorite color, and he got to name it, and he was one of the 13 people who authored this scholarly article for the journal, he has not yet seen it. He believes it exists, but he has not seen it. He has only heard about it through what his peers have told him it looks like and that it exists. But when it came to the mapping of the retinas, apparently that's an extensive process and maybe a costly one, and they had to draw straws to see who would be the one who got to look through the device and gets to see this brand new color. And so there were some in the group who got to see it and were privy to it, and others that have not seen it. But he says this, and this is how his final comment: I believe that one day I will see it. So, if I've been too subtle, let's recall what has happened. On Easter, a year ago, 13 people comprised of students and their teacher embarked on something, this quest to discover something new and a new way of seeing things. A great discovery was made. It has been called the most beautiful of all things. It is even the favorite, passionately loved by those who have not seen it, and some were privileged enough to experience it firsthand, while others simply learned about it after the fact and had to decide at that point if they were going to adopt this belief. You with me? Wink, wink, right? Okay, so imagine now the story that you've heard. Amanda began the story in Mark's gospel, where we've been looking at Mark throughout this season of Lent, and today we finish up the gospel. Mark's kind of a peculiar gospel because it's got sort of multiple endings. There's additions that were added on later. It was like the first Christians said, that's not how the story quite ends. It can't just end with the women going to the tomb and they find the stone rolled away and it's empty and they are greeted by a messenger, but it's not Jesus, and they're scared and they don't tell anyone. Well, the story can't end that way. Somebody has to be told. So then we get a little bit more from the story, and then Steve had added on to where it continues, and it talks about how then the women encountered Jesus. And then their obligation was to tell the rest of the disciples, Jesus is going to meet you, go on to Galilee. But they tell the disciples, and they at least initially decide that they don't want to believe. And on the one hand, it's hard to understand that. I mean, here they are. Jesus has been prepping them for this moment. He has not been terribly subtle about what's going to happen. And he's been performing miracles. And he has raised people from the dead. But apparently it was a bridge too far when the women came and said, Jesus met us. And he says to go on ahead to Galilee and you will meet him again there. They don't believe it. And yet, I am sympathetic too. Because they have been through the most traumatic moment of their lives, haven't they? They have dedicated their lives to following this man, to following this teacher for several years, and all seems to be for naught on Friday, when they saw this man that they had invested their whole selves in die a gruesome death on the cross. In our lives, we will also have times like this, where we will go through the suffering or the pain or the disease or the grief and these things that build up in us and cause us to ask those hard questions. The doubt begins to seep in. How could this happen? How could a God who is truly loving allow this to take place? Why won't God intervene in this moment that seems just ripe with opportunity for God to come again into our lives and do things and set things aright? And so I understand the disciples. They're skeptical. This has taken a terrible turn, a turn that they were hoping would be different than what they were led to believe. And then when these women come to them and they say, we've seen him, they say, I'm not sure I'm on board with that. Jesus later comes to them, as you heard in the story, and he shows himself to them, and then they begin to believe, and then he empowers them, and he says, now you've heard this message, and you have to go share it, just like Amanda told the children. When you have good news, it's an obligation, as well as a deep desire to share that good news. And that is eventually what takes place, but it's hard in the moment to be on board with that. There's a passage that comes to us from the letter of 1 Peter. 1 Peter is another kind of unusual letter in the New Testament because we're not quite sure that it's Peter that wrote it, and we're not quite sure who he wrote it to. The thing that is pretty clear about 1 Peter is that the people that are being addressed have been suffering. There has been some kind of persecution that has taken place. They are an early Christian community. This probably is written about 50 years after the resurrection. So it's very early in the life of the church. And already there's people that are suffering for their beliefs. The pressure is intense. It's easy to cave in. It's easy to conform to the larger society. It's easy to abandon one's beliefs. But they are being told in this letter to keep the faith, despite the hardship that they are enduring, to hold strong, to believe in the power of the resurrection even when it becomes very difficult to do so because things seem bleak. And I want to share these words with you because I think they capture part of the message that Jesus was trying to convey to the disciples and that Jesus, I believe, would want to communicate to us today. From 1 Peter chapter 1, starting in verse 8. Although you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and rejoice with an indescribable and glorious joy. For you are receiving the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Folks, we talk about this often, that the world is definitely not as it should be. I was moved by some of the images in the song that we just sang in that video, So Will I, when it shows all of the joy and then it shows all of the hatred and the anger and the violence. And then it's the redemption story again. It's the message about hold strong to the faith. Love and believe in that which, even though you haven't seen it, you know to be true. And even though we have not been invited to have a front row seat to the empty tomb, we have also seen evidence of the resurrection around us. Every time a child is born into this world, we see the miracle of new life and the power of resurrection. Every time that we see reconciliation between individuals or parties of people who have been at odds for so long, but there is healing that can only be described as miraculous, resurrection is present. When we come together and we serve those who are among us who are the poor and the suffering and those in need, when we share a kind word, when we offer an act of service, when we work toward peace and justice, reconciliation is visible. When groups of people around the world gather for worship, as we are doing now with millions of our brothers and sisters in Christ, resurrection is alive and in our midst. This is something that we get to see. Now, we may not have the full picture, but as James Fong says, we believe that one day we will see it. And the resurrection that we get a glimpse of today, and the resurrection that will be fully realized for all of humanity one day, is truly what is only defined as the most beautiful thing. Will you pray with me?